first of all, thank you to Hillary and Liz for joining us today. It's an honor and privilege to have you guys on our Zoom session. So this is going to be a discussion about the Menopause Diet Plan, some housekeeping aspects. Everybody's is muted and everybody's video is not on, just so you guys know, except for the presenters and us, of course. We will go through the presentation, and we would love to get questions through the chat aspect because it makes it go easier with our previous sessions that we've done that worked out really, really well. And if you have any specific questions that you want to ask Liz or Hillary, you can send them our way, and we will be glad to share it with them, so you could have perhaps a private conversation if you want, or such, or such. But we'll start with the chat, and then if people really have a lot of questions, we might open it up. It depends how you guys behave. Okay, so we'll go from there. Again, my name is Saadino. I'm the owner of Acton Pharmacy. With me here is our Director of Health and Wellness, Beth Gardner. And it's an honor and privilege again to have Hillary Wright and Elizabeth Ward with us today. I'm just going to read a little blurb about each one of them, and we can get going with the session. Hillary Wright is a registered dietitian and the author of the PCOS Diet Plan, and the Pre-Diabetes Diet Plan. She is the Director of Nutrition Counseling for the Domar Center for Mind and Body Health at Boston IVF, and is a senior nutritionist at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. Elizabeth Ward is also a registered dietitian with more than 30 years of experience counseling patients and writing about nutrition and health. She's an experienced recipe developer and food photographer, and the author or co-author of several books, including Super Nutrition After 50, Live Longer and Better, and Expect the Best, Your Guide to Healthy Eating Before, During, and After Pregnancy. Again, welcome to the Zoom session. I'll give it over to you guys. I'll mute myself. And Liz and Hillary, thank you guys so much for joining us. It's all yours.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So today we're going to give you a brief overview of our most recent and only project together ever, the Menopause Diet Plan, a natural guide to managing hormones, health, and happiness. And one thing that we do want you to know is that we are both postmenopausal women. So we write what we know, and we use the science and personal experience to guide people, to guide other women. Also, we've known each other since college. We both have 3 children, and we've pretty much gone through many of life's ups and downs together, and now we're in this phase of life together. So here we are. So we're going to talk about hormones today because we get a lot of questions about, what are hormones? How can I manipulate them to my benefit, during menopause? And I just want to get on the same page with everybody about what a hormone is. Basically, hormones are chemical messengers, and they're released into the bloodstream by glands. So you can kind of think of them almost like as carrier pigeons in a way, right? They're kind of,
I like that.
I know, I thought of that yesterday.
Write that one down.
And
Nice.
blood carries these hormones to their target organs and tissues. And then these organs and tissues, they receive the messages and they act on the messages from the hormones. And basically hormones direct your whole life. They help regulate the most basic functions that make life possible, including growth and development, reproduction. Of course, we're always talking about estrogen and progesterone and all of those hormones, which you're going to get to in a minute. Also your mood and your metabolism. So you can see how hormones would play a big role across the lifespan, but also in menopause as well. So, estrogen is really the hormone of concern during, perimenopause and all the menopause transition years, and also after menopause. The menopause is all about changing levels of hormones, and estrogen is the #1 hormone that we talk about. So the ovaries produce the most estrogen. They also produce progesterone, which is necessary during your childbearing years. But the adrenal glands and also fat tissue make estrogen, but they make much less. So it's not like you don't have any more estrogen once you hit menopause. You do. You just have much less. So during your 40s, if it's a natural, perimenopause transition and not a surgical one or due to any other illness or other situation, excuse me, your ovaries release less estrogen. Your periods become irregular, and this time frame can last up to 10 years. It typically starts in your late 40s, but we know women that are noticing changes in their early 40s. And that's really why we say, don't wait till menopause, hits you like a freight train. Start to decide, that you're going to take some steps in the right direction. So technically you're not postmenopausal until you've missed your period for 12 months in a row, and not due to illness, medication, pregnancy, or breastfeeding. So there has to be uninterrupted in a row 12 months. And as I mentioned, estrogen doesn't completely disappear after menopause. You have estrone, which is a weaker form of estrogen, remains present in the body, and for a reason too. Okay, so you really don't have to tell perimenopausal and menopausal women too much about the effects of less estrogen, because it becomes really obvious as you experience it. But one thing I don't think people know is that nearly every tissue in the body, including your heart, your brain, your bones, breast, and colon, has estrogen receptors. Which is why there are so many changes across the board when estrogen levels drop. It's not that you just don't get your period anymore. A lot of your tissues change. Your metabolism seems to change, although Hillary and I do say in the book that even though you're gaining weight, we're not really, I don't think the science is quite there about whether it's actually menopause, the reason why you're gaining weight, or if it's aging in general, right? But we do know that the distribution of the weight to the belly is really related to menopause. So you may find that happens. Sleep difficulties, mood swings, fatigue, changes in digestion. I know you deal with this a lot with your patients as well. Muscle loss, which again has an aging component. Changes in memory and brain fog, which we like to say that we have a lot.
We're surviving.
We do very well with our brain fog. Increased risk for chronic conditions such as osteoporosis and heart disease, because estrogen is actually protective. When it comes to heart disease, women on average don't develop heart disease for 10 years, 10 years later than men. So, the thinking is that the estrogen is protective. And also hot flashes, which is one of the number one concerns. So I'm going to talk about hot flashes because I just, again, want everyone to be on the same page. Well, what is it? Well, it's really just the sudden onset of heat that seems to come out of nowhere. And, you may have heard the term night sweats. Those are hot flashes that happen at night. So you may be having night sweats, but really nothing during the day. A lot of women complain about that. So why does it happen? Well, fluctuation in hormone levels that affects the part of the brain tells that part of the brain that regulates your thermostat, your kind of internal thermostat, that you're overheating mistakenly. So your body overreacts to try to cool you off, and you start sweating, sometimes profusely, and maybe in the middle of when you're at work or at the store, anytime. But really hot flash, we're not making light of it, because we know that about 80% of women living in the U.S. have hot flashes, including us. And some starting in their 40s and 50s when they're still having periods. So it's not like, really, and you can have them after your period ends too. So it's not just like, oh, I hit menopause and I'm going to have a hot flash again. So hot flashes and trouble sleeping, we find go hand in hand a lot, and they happen to also be the two biggest problems linked to the transition to menopause. And really the only way or one of the only ways from like a medicinal standpoint to treat hot flashes is through hormone replacement therapy. It's the most effective treatment. Again, that's up to you and your healthcare professional. I think we need to consider a lot of things.
Yeah.
But from a lifestyle approach and helping, maybe even things out, I think it's worth noting, and we talk about this in the book, that Asian women report fewer hot flashes and menopausal symptoms could be because they eat more soy, and soy has estrogen-like compounds called isoflavones. So there are plenty of good reasons to eat soy, but we have to tell you that the science has not identified any consistent effect on hot flashes. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Certainly a great food to concentrate on. Concentrated isoflavone supplements, or taking it as a supplement, they have been studied to alleviate hot flashes with mixed results. Other supplements like black cohosh and dong quai and ginseng, they are touted sometimes as natural remedies for hot flashes. Some of them have estrogen-like action, which we really just kind of, throw that red flag up to people, because if you're taking anything that has an estrogen-like action, of course you're taking it to mimic estrogen. Should you be is like kind of another question, and that's something that you want to explore based on your personal history and also the other medications that you take too. Couple of other things, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's talk therapy, that may help women who are really suffering with hot flashes, and also breast cancer survivors. And the talk therapy may also improve mood and sleep and quality of life. Also relaxation therapy, which helps with so many things. Acupuncture may be helpful. Stopping smoking. Smoking is linked to increased hot flashes, and getting regular exercise. Again, probably a combination of these things are going to work, or maybe none of these things are going to work for you. But we just wanted to let you know that there is some research behind these. And Hillary and I always like to say that, at the same time that your estrogen levels are wonky, they're here, there, and everywhere, you may also be dealing with, age-related health problems that you would just naturally have, like during aging, your own aging parents and their health needs and their safety, empty nest syndrome, the kids flying the coop, but really they've kind of come back home to roost. So now it's kind of like the opposite during the pandemic, but it will happen. It will happen. Financial fears or challenges surrounding retirement, divorce, separation, a combination of any of these, maybe none of these. But it's really no wonder that the menopausal years are considered a time of increased vulnerability for stress, anxiety, and depression. So I want to just talk really briefly before Hillary gets going on her part about cortisol and adrenaline. So when you're feeling stressed, cortisol and adrenaline, which are hormones, are released into the bloodstream. And stress is meant to be short-lived. And I love the way Hillary talks about the fact that she always mentions this, that our DNA really hasn't changed from cave woman days, as we like to say. And in cave woman days, there could have been a lot of different types of danger. And it's meant to be short-lived. Your body is supposed to react to that and get away from the danger. Once your brain ascertains it's dangerous or it's not dangerous, then you either move or you don't. So it's meant to be short-lived and protective. But in our modern life, many women are experiencing a lot of stress on a constant basis, and this has effects on your body. So cortisol is helpful in that it reduces inflammation throughout the body, but it also promotes glucose production, leading to higher than normal insulin levels. So it may be a factor in weight gain if you're very stressed out. Having a lot of cortisol running around in your bloodstream constantly may be an issue. Cortisol can also mess with your memory. So if you're very stressed out and you're wondering, why can't I remember anything? It could be part of the whole brain fog syndrome. So in order to counter stress, exercise helps to reduce levels of adrenaline and cortisol. And it also counters stress by helping to produce feel-good hormones called anandamide and serotonin, which travel to the brain and help to ward off symptoms of anxiety and depression. So as you can see, hormones play a very big role in overall health and, fitness, really, your whole life. But these are particularly helpful to know about during menopause. Can't get that to advance.
My computer.
Oops, we're trying to advance the next slide. Okay,
All right.
so that's your part.
Okay, thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
So I spend a lot of my waking hours talking about insulin for various reasons and all of the different kinds of practice that I have. So I do a lot of diabetes prevention. So anybody's familiar with PCOS or polycystic ovary syndrome, we know that that raises your risk for diabetes. Well, so does age. And so a lot of women lead, a third or more, maybe up to close to a half of their life in their menopausal years. And so insulin has become, we now realize it's a really important hormone at play in a lot of health problems. So for example, some of you may have heard sugar feeds cancer. If somebody has a cancer diagnosis, sugar feeds cancer, that's about insulin. Diabetes risk goes up as we get older, that's about insulin. So it's really important to understand insulin because many of the chronic health problems that we're experiencing now are a fallout from a condition called insulin resistance. So it's really helpful to understand what this hormone is all about because insulin is a hormone as well. So, I always go back to this evolutionary stuff because I think it's so fascinating. But, physiologically, we haven't changed a lot since the Stone Age. And insulin is the classic anti-starvation diet hormone. So insulin is all about fueling the body and not wasting any leftover fuel. So insulin is what we call an anabolic hormone. So it's produced physiologically in the beta cells in our pancreas. And so when someone has insulin resistance, it means their cells are not as sensitive to it as they should be. So it triggers the pancreas to constantly work in overdrive, making extra insulin, which strains the pancreas and then potentially can lead to prediabetes and diabetes, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But I'd like people to really constantly kind of refer back as I continue to talk that insulin is an anabolic hormone. It's a growth hormone. It's the most important growth hormone in the body because it's so involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates primarily, but also fats and proteins. Primarily, or its first kind of run job is to assist with the absorption of glucose from the blood into the liver, fat, and muscle cells. But insulin also doesn't like to waste leftover fuel. So when we use, when the body is trying to use insulin to absorb glucose from the blood and into the cells, well, the cells are only going to take on the amount of glucose they need at that moment, and then they're going to kind of shut the door. So in its role as an anti-starvation hormone, insulin's going to say, well, where else can I direct this fuel? So one of the places it'll try to direct it is into this stuff this stuff called glycogen. It's in our muscles and our liver. I like to think of it as like little sugar cubes that we hold on to that can be crumbled and thrown into our blood should we need glucose and we haven't eaten recently. So we're never going to die from low blood sugar in the absence of taking insulin injections. You may feel miserable, but your body has all kinds of backup plans to release glucose into the blood. It can actually take your muscles and make glucose out of that as well. But again, the glycogen stores are only going to take on what they need, and then they're going to shut the door. So the insulin and its anti-starvation function is going to say, okay, where else can I store this? Because remember, our body still thinks we're Stone Age people at risk of starving to death tomorrow. So, not so much here in this country, but it's become evident in recent times there's a lot of food insecure people, and in many places around the world, makes sense that the body still does this. But our environment has changed radically since like the 1980s, and this insistence on storing excessive glucose as fat has become a major liability, particularly because our body loves to store fat in the abdomen. That's called visceral adipose tissue or belly fat, which is one of the things that perimenopausal, menopausal women get the most distressed about.
Aren't you going to use the technical term menopause muffin?
menopause muffin. Right. So even the thin women, and so they often don't get the empathy from the rest of us.
The rest of
But
what
you
is
know,
really going before that?
yeah. So, but even thin women will also say, I'm getting thicker around the middle. I haven't done anything differently.
Right.
And so it's, kind of flagging hormones and changing metabolism. Again, that starts many years before actual menopause. So we talk a lot about that in the book. Start paying attention a lot sooner than you think you need to.
But if you haven't, that's okay too.
Right.
Right.
Because
I
you
mean,
can't
it's not like
you can't micromanage
you can't,
everything.
do anything.
We're in the
Right,
acceptance
yeah.
phase.
Yeah,
We're doing what we
there's
can.
the stage of menopause.
Right. We're in the acceptance phase.
Well,
But-
you are. I'm getting
I
there.
am. I'm better at it than she
She's
is.
much better.
So keep in mind, as long as you have excessive or higher levels than perfect of insulin circulating around, your body is going to be in a more calorie storing mode. So the weight management thing plays into the insulin as well as the blood sugar regulation. So risk of prediabetes and diabetes increases beyond, through the menopausal years and beyond. Part of that is just simply up to age. So the way we diagnose prediabetes and diabetes is by checking elevations in blood sugar levels, and whether you're pre-diabetic or diabetic depends on the severity of those elevations. But I'm going to talk about the testing more in a minute. It's also important to realize that everybody with diabetes prior to that had a period of time, probably, years, where they had prediabetes, meaning their blood sugar was bumping up, but it was not high enough to call diabetes. We call that prediabetes. But everybody with prediabetes had a period of time, generally years, where they were insulin resistant, but when their cells weren't responding to the insulin sensitively, the pancreas just chugged out more. So what happens over time is that your pancreas can just get tuckered out from having to work that hard. And when it can no longer keep up with the demand, then the blood sugars start to bump up and show prediabetes. So if you have risk factors for diabetes or prediabetes, it's actually ideal to get on them prior to being diagnosed with prediabetes, because that means you've already been insulin resistant for quite some time. But prediabetes is reversible. Diabetes is manageable, is controllable. But prediabetes, in the majority of instances with proactive efforts, can be reversed. But both prediabetes and diabetes are caused by insulin resistance, which increases with age, weight, and inactivity. So this is the time of life that just lifestyle in general, regardless of hormones, people's maybe lack of attention to their diet or their levels of physical activity may start to catch up with them. And it gets hard for the researchers to tease out what's related to age and what's related to hormone changes. So when we're talking about lowering the risk of diabetes or prediabetes, lifestyle interventions are designed to target that underlying insulin resistance. But insulin has, a lot of functions, which I already touched on to some degree. And but again, they're all involved in making cells grow. But it's what we do with diet, mainly carbohydrates and quality and quantity, that influences how much insulin our body produces. So if someone has, there's two main ways to test for prediabetes and diabetes. They use these mostly because they're most accessible. A fasting glucose test, which means you have to have not eaten anything, like nothing, not even that cup of coffee, preferably, for 8 or 10 hours before having your blood drawn. If you have that number is 99 or below 99 or less, that's considered normal. If it's between 100 and 125, it's considered prediabetes. It has to be over 126, ideally on at least a couple different tests taken when somebody's not otherwise ill or on certain medications that may raise their blood sugar. But increasingly, clinicians are using hemoglobin A1C tests to diagnose prediabetes and diabetes. So the hemoglobin cells live for about 2 to 3 months, and a certain percentage of the sugar floating around in your blood is going to stick to those hemoglobin cells. So they can look at the surface area of our hemoglobin cells under a microscope and say, this percentage is normal, this percentage is elevated. So a normal hemoglobin A1C is less than 5.7. If it's between 5.7 and 6.4, it's considered prediabetes, and it has to be over 6.5 to be considered diagnosable for diabetes. There are also oral glucose tolerance tests, which in some people might be even the best way to do it, but they take more effort. Women who have had babies have done those, either the 1 hour or the 3 hours for gestational diabetes, but they're more of a big deal than just not eating breakfast and getting your labs drawn. but the A1C, you don't have to be fasting. Okay, so I just want to touch on glucose regulation for a second, not to get too into the weeds with the science part, but in my experience, in order to understand how do I keep my circulating insulin levels lower and healthy, it's important to understand what drives that response. So we already talked about, insulin is produced by your pancreas. Now, if you can see my little cursor here, which hangs off your intestines really close to where nutrients show up in your blood after digestion. So if we think about how does our body use fuel, because that's what insulin's involved with, this is a blood vessel. This is sugar, more technically called glucose in your blood. As we already discussed, you have to have some in your blood at all times or you'd be dead. If somebody accidentally eats too much insulin, it can be a fatal thing. So we always have to have this baseline insulin because all the cells of our body use it as fuel. The biggest user of glucose are your muscles because we have muscles. I mean, look, they're all over the place, attached to every bone. But the most aggressive user of glucose is your central nervous system. Your brain and your nerves, by volume, use twice as much glucose. So I like to explain this to my patients. I'll say, if on one hand you had a gram of brain matter, the other hand you had a gram of muscle tissue, the brain matter is going to be burning twice as much glucose. And that makes sense because evolution figured out a long time ago without the central nervous system function, nothing else. You could have the healthiest heart in the world. If you're brain dead, you're a goner. So the body has learned to prioritize and make sure the central nervous system gets the fuel it needs. So because that's so important, your brain and your nerves are constantly keeping track of your blood sugar levels and likes to see them roll over the day. It's also why when we go too long without eating, and I'm just going to skip to the next and come back to this. When we go too long without eating, hunger is largely triggered by your brain's demand for fuel. So when we go too long without eating, we all know what that feels like. And all those symptoms are central nervous system symptoms. Hangry. Everybody knows what hangry is. Fatigue, difficulty focusing, shaky. A lot of women with PCOS have very significant insulin resistance, and they'll often say, I literally get kind of shaky when I go too long without eating. And when we feel like that, if you think of your hunger on a 0 to 10 scale, with like 0 to 2 is how you feel like right after you eat a satisfying meal, and 8 to 10 is I'm starving. It's important to realize that this is not a psychological place. This is a physiologic condition where your blood sugars are too low, your hunger hormones are high, your primitive Stone Age girl brain is going to want you to go kill an antelope, eat the whole thing, stock up. And that's just because, not because you're a weak loser who lacks willpower, which is what women do all the time, like, oh my God, I couldn't eat a salad when I was so starved, I was shaky. Well, that's not what your brain is going to demand. Your brain is going to want carbohydrates because it knows what brings up your blood sugar. So I think it's important for people to understand how our body utilizes fuel so we can work with that instead of thinking we can diet our way. Women are great dieters until about 4:30 in the afternoon. And then the brain gets really ticked off. It says, I've done with your
feeding me
your lame behavior.
Yeah,
and then
not right.
we end up overeating at night, which we talk a lot about timing and circadian rhythms and things like that in the book. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So basically, we're never going to die of low blood sugar because our body will always come up with some form. But overwhelmingly, the primary source of glucose in the blood are carbohydrates. When we eat carbohydrates, within about 60 to 90 minutes, the majority of them are in your blood as more glucose. So I have to figure out how to do that swoopy thing so more sugar can float in.
Yeah.
So once the sugar shows up in your blood, your body is immediately going to go to the task of trying to lower it within 2 or 3 hours because our body knows the sugar needs to get out of the blood and into the cells to fuel them. But our body also knows it's not good to have too much sugar in your blood. It's very inflammatory, which is why diabetes and heart disease go hand in hand. Supposedly about 65% of people with diabetes die of heart disease. So it's important to keep good blood sugar control to lower your risk of heart disease if you have prediabetes or diabetes. The thing is, though, the sugar can't just float out of the blood and into the cells. It needs an assist of this hormone called insulin, which is made by your pancreas. So again, you eat your carbohydrates within about an hour to an hour and a half. They're in your blood as glucose. Your pancreas checks your blood sugar just like as if it was a glucometer. And it's going to secrete out what it thinks should be enough insulin to unlock your cells. Ideally, insulin would kind of connect with these things in our cells called insulin receptors. They're like keyholes. Insulin connects with the receptor, unlocks the cell. Cell opens up, glucose moves out of the blood, cell is fueled, and everybody's happy. What insulin resistance is the cells are somewhat numb to the action of insulin. Now this, again, is beyond the scope of this talk, but we talk about this a lot in the book. Insulin resistance was really good when you were a cave person and you were at risk of starving because it helped your body not let your muscles gobble up all the fuel in an attempt to save your brain. So it was something that kind of triggered or kicked in when humans got stressed, which throughout most of history was risk of starving. Now our stressors are more overnutrition, sedentary lifestyle, both of which are very foreign to our physiology. You know, pandemics.
Pandemics.
You know,
yeah.
take your pick.
Yeah.
All of these things can
Yep.
trigger a stress response that can aggravate the insulin resistance. That means in order to regulate your blood sugar, your pancreas is going to have to work harder to make more insulin to overwhelm the receptors and force the action.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the challenge is there. We now have a body that has more growth hormones circulating around in it. So some people are going to say, I just heard her say carbs show up as sugar in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a huge quality and quantity thing I'm going to touch on, but it does not involve not eating healthy things like fruit, for example. God sent Adam and Eve out of the garden because of the apple. Apples have carbs and carbs are evil. You know, I spend so much time talking about this with my oncology patients at Dana-Farber. You know, nobody ever, in fact, they actually have research studies tying fruit intake, not juice, but whole fruit intake to reduce risk of diabetes. If that was the case, why would fruit be bad?
Mm-hmm.
But it does help a lot to pay attention to the quantity and the quality of the carbohydrates that we eat. So we talk about this as the 2 Qs in the book. The quality is, are they natural whole foods forms of carbohydrates? You know, oats, whole grains, brown rice, legumes, which are loaded with fiber. Sweet potatoes, or are they candy cakes, cookies, ice cream, soda, white flour things, white rice? We go to great lengths to make sure people realize we don't tell people here's a whole list of things you can't eat. We're really into what are you doing most of the time, what are you doing occasionally. But it is important to know that when you take a carbohydrate from nature and you process it into something else before you even eat it, it's like pre-digesting it, it is going to raise your blood sugar faster. So that's this kind of bump, this spiky thing right here is more what happens when you're eating refined carbohydrates and added sugars compared to this kind of more rolling hill sort of curve, which happens when we eat carbohydrates that come closer to their natural form. But ultimately, how high your blood sugar goes depends upon how big was the quantity of the carbohydrate you consumed. Larger portions, high blood sugar surges, smaller portions, bumps. But do know that the faster your blood sugar goes up, and we all know this, we can think about this, the faster your blood sugar goes up, the faster it goes down. And that's when your brain starts screaming for more carbs. So women in particular women are great dieters who love to nibble on low fat, you know, stuff without protein that helps to kind of temper the whole thing. So if you want your blood sugars to do that rolling hills thing that we were just talking about, combining, containing, having a carbohydrate that still has its fiber is important because human beings can't digest fiber. You have to have 4 stomachs like a cow or a goat. You have to be a ruminant to break it down and get calories. We don't have it. So during digestion, we have to kind of sift through the fiber and untangle the nutrients, and the fiber stays behind, keeps you from getting constipation, hemorrhoids, and all that, diverticulosis, but also feeds your healthy gut bacteria, which we talk about that too in the book. But also pairing carbohydrates with protein and some healthy fat where you can. These things slow down the rate at which food goes from your stomach into your intestines, which means you're going to get more of that rolling hills. Again, the slower your blood sugar rises, the slower it falls, and the longer it will be before you're physically hungry again.
And the less insulin you have in your bloodstream.
And the less insulin is going to be called into action.
Right.
Now, there are medications that people are put on to help their body use insulin better, but there are natural ways to sensitize yourselves to insulin. I'm going to hop to the weight loss one first because we know the primary treatment for insulin resistance is weight loss, but as little as 5 to 10% weight loss can improve a lot about your health, including your risk of diabetes. The diabetes prevention program tells us that if somebody has prediabetes and they lose as little as 7% of their weight, they are like 58% less likely to be diabetic 3 years later. But exercise, it's really important to appreciate why that is critical to managing not just weight, but blood sugar. Because if we go back to that first slide where we talked about the insulin has to unlock the cell and then the sugar moves out, what helps the sugar move out are these proteins inside the cells called glucose transporters, GLUT4 for short. So the GLUT4 proteins are supposed to be in your cells just waiting for the insulin to come along and unlock it. And the trigger for the production of glucose transporters is physical activity. So that's why anybody with diabetes will say, you know, if I test my blood sugar and I take a walk and I test it when I come back, it's going to be lower. It's also why diabetes was a rich person's disease years ago, because everybody else's life was physically too demanding. So again, we go into great detail with our plan. Is designed to give people easy visuals and tips and recipes to figure out how to balance your carbohydrates and your proteins and your vegetables. And it's based on some very widely recognized plant-based diet modeling. We came up with our own kind of a plate that we hired my brother-in-law, who's a graphic artist, to come up with and have in the book, but it is very well substantiated by what we know about these kinds of types of balance plates. This one down here, this healthy eating plate, is from Harvard. This is Choose My Plate, which is what replaced the food pyramid that many of us, well, we're actually 4 food group people, we're that old. And then this is the Mediterranean diet. So this type of eating plan, not anything overly restrictive, because overly restrictive things don't tend to last, but we try to help people find the middle ground and also realize that for blood sugar regulation, weight management, diet and lifestyle factors, they all contribute something that works synergistically. So it's not just food, it's not just activity, losing a little weight, doing what we can to get sleep, managing our emotional health to the best of our ability. So what's in our book, how it helps to regulate hormones. So again, we're not telling people, read the book and your estrogen is going to come back. There's aspects of hormonal health related to digestion, metabolism, stress management, emotional health. Hormones do a lot of things. But basically our plan is designed to help people eat according to our body's clock, also known as our circadian rhythms, which we talk about a lot, including the various forms of fasting designed to tap into them, many of which are unsustainable, some of which have some teeth to them.
But also the fact that, insulin, you do better to eat earlier in the day because of your insulin rhythm.
Right. Most people genetically are likely more sensitive to insulin in the early part of the day and more resistant to it at night. So this cultural habit we have of not eating enough earlier in the day and then eating, skewing eating to the evening, either because we're too busy to eat or we're trying to diet, which we already pointed out, blows up in your face about what. We try to help people give multiple kinds of approaches to manage this based on where they are and how much detail they figure they need based on calories or just balance plates, things like that. It is definitely a plant-based diet. A plant-basast diet does not mean a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet. It can be if people want it. It just means basically 2/3 to 3/4 of your foods are coming from minimally processed plant foods. It's a little lower in carbohydrates. It's not low carb, but it's a little curbed in carbohydrates based on evidence to suggest that may help some women lose weight and may help with blood sugar regulation. And we encourage more protein, and Liz did a great job of dissecting the importance of protein and how bad a lot of women are eating enough
but also
throughout the day.
The current recommendations really aren't high enough either. There's
Exactly.
a lot of new science that says they should be high, especially for older women.
Right. And science, sometimes doesn't move at a rapid pace.
Yeah.
So
we read it.
We read it.
We read it for you.
We're going to tell you that. And then there's a whole chapter on physical activity, what kind, how often, and all that kind of stuff. So that's a very long book in a nutshell, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Liz and Hillary. That was a great presentation.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for the great information. So one question is, one question has come through. So let me just announce, if you have a question that you want to ask in person, just just raise your hand and I should be able to see it here, and I'll unmute you so you can ask it in person. Well, we have a couple of questions here already. The first question is, I'm post-menopause, but I'm still having problems losing weight, even though I eat healthy. Why is that?
Well, without knowing you, and
That's a hard question because it can be so individual.
yeah, it's very individual. But there's a lot of factors. One is timing of meals. The other is quantity of calories. The other is quality of calories. The other is, physical activity, but also the type of physical activity.
Body composition.
Body composition, genetics, sleep factors. What else have I forgotten?
Emotional eating, stress eating is a really big one. Particularly medications.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it appears that postmenopausal women may be more prone to stress eating than women prior to menopause.
But she's saying she eats healthy. So, I mean, it really, might come down to really examining everything that you're doing. So during perimenopause, I gained 10 pounds, let's say. And I was like, I'm a dietitian.
Yep.
I eat really well.
Yep.
I exercise 6 times a week.
Yep.
And Hillary gained weight. And then if you really take a look at everything that you're doing, like you can see, you have to tighten this up if you want to lose weight. And that's what I did. I went through and I said, I can't nibble throughout the day. I have to have more protein in my meals. I have to eat more of my calories earlier. Needed to change my exercise. It sounds like a lot, but I mean, I did it over a period of time. And I didn't lose all the weight. I still didn't lose it all. And Hillary and I always talk about this. We're like, what are your expectations? And can you actually meet your expectations given the fact that you are postmenopausal, your metabolism has slowed down? And are you willing to go like to a really Spartan lifestyle in order to achieve that?
And the Spartan lifestyle might not work either.
Right.
So, I mean, the bottom line is it's hard for us to say without sitting down with somebody and kind of really dissecting this. But part of getting to the stage of life, like we talk about this all the time, like it's trying to accept that we can't micromanage every aspect of our weight and our body and our body image. Now, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on women to do that. But I always say, like, all it takes is one person in your social circle who, seems on the outside to look like they've looked all along to make everybody else feel like they're just not trying hard enough. Though that, if you ask that person, they probably would say their body is also changing in some ways too. So we can tell you for sure, it's not just about eat less, not losing weight, then continue to eat less. That can just back in metabolism into a corner.
Yeah.
But I think doing strength training can help people feel good about, feeling strong, having some muscles, having some flexibility, not having a lot of aches and pains can be good body image boosters, regardless of what your weight is.
Thank you, guys. So I have Angela, I'll give you the stage in 1 second. I have a couple more questions here. What do you think of intermittent fasting?
We talk about it in the book. I actually have a website where I wrote a long post about it and talked about a lot of the science. We come down on the end of what we call time-restricted fasting, right? Time-restricted eating, where we like to see women and men go about 12 hours without eating anything. And there are reasons for that, and it's not a form of torture. Although it may feel like it at first when you try it. But the reason why we do that is because it's good to give your body a rest. And Hillary mentioned the circadian clock, your body clock, your body rhythms. Research shows that we do better if we eat in terms of weight control. We do better if we eat earlier in the day. So most people are going to sleep through that 12-hour period, right? They're going to get maybe 7-8 hours in there. But we like, even in our meal plans, if you want to do a meal plan and you want to go, to that level, we don't have any evening snacks in our meal plan. You're probably going, I can't live without my evening snack. Maybe right off at the beginning you can't, but so many of the meals and the other snacks during the day are so nourishing that we like to have you stop eating, after dinner.
Yeah, so when we think it matters what those 12 hours, where they fall as relates to the rising and setting of the sun, to capture that influence of the circadian rhythms. So intermittent fasting is actually like a heading with like 3 major approaches. 2 out of 3 we don't think are any more sustainable than over-restricted dieting. 5-2 fasting, where every 5 days a week you eat whatever you want, 2 days a week you eat less than 500 calories, or every other day fasting. I don't see that. I've seen people lose weight doing stuff, and we're not lab rats. We have complex relationships with food, and we go out of our way to try to make sure people don't we want people to enjoy. I mean, we like food. People think dietitians don't like food. Like we majored in it in college.
Most people.
It's all about what are you doing. We talk a lot about the 80-20 approach. What are you doing 80% of the time? What are you doing 20% of the time?
Well, it could, so I think the appeal of intermittent fasting is it's like a jump start, like I'm going to lose some weight right away. And you may. One of the problems I have is we're talking about feeding your body nutrients all the time, right? So those 2 days out of the week, when you're eating less than 500 calories, you're not getting enough protein for your muscles. You're not, it's just hard to work in all the nutrition that you need during that. That's a very extreme.
It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, it's just not.
It's not any more sustainable than taking out. I mean, you might have the rare person that can do that, but really, after decades of talking to thousands of people, that's not your.
And so you don't recommend the intermittent diet?
Well,
extended time fasting, and we do talk about that in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, and I say if you want to do it, you need to work with a dietitian who can work in everything that you need.
Thank you. Angela, the stage is yours.
Hi, I'm from England. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Obviously, Japan, they don't even have a word for the menopause, or it's not so easily talked about over there. Do you think that's because of the Western diet? I mean, their diet is so different with the soya and all that. Do you think that makes a difference?
I think there's so much that's different about that culture that I think the soy is probably part of it. They have a completely different body composition than your typical,
European descent.
They also, interestingly, have very high rates of diabetes because they are more prone to insulin resistance. So, every culture, the thing about insulin resistance is any culture that their ancestry was closer to starvation is going to be more prone to insulin resistance. So the highest rates of insulin in the world are in Asia, China, Japan, India. And when you think of cultures where they have high rates of diabetes, they don't tend to get big butts when they gain weight. They tend to get big around the middle. And that's a genetic thing that was great for survival, starvation survival. But I think they tend to be thinner in that culture. When there's a lot of things about women in Asian cultures when they emigrate to the United States. Like in Asian countries, they have lower rates of breast cancer, and when they get it, it tends to be less aggressive. Within a generation of relocating to a place like the United States, their breast cancer risks start to look like everybody else.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of various lifestyle differences.
I think it's hard to go around to each culture and pick something out and say that's the answer, which I think
it would be a great research question, wouldn't it?
I think it is being researched.
I think a lot of observational research does suggest that eating soy, particularly at a younger age, may be protective against breast cancer and may ease menopausal symptoms.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Angela, how did you hear about our lecture, if I may ask?
It was advertised on a website, Eventbrite.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
On international today.
Across the pond, we appreciate it.
Thank you so
That's
much.
right. I mean, I'm also interested in the menopause myself because I've got 2 degrees in psychology and that, and I'm looking to start a coaching, life coaching business. So I'm looking to look at the menopause and stuff like that. So
Great.
it's been great. Your webinar's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Angela.
Thank you.
Okay. We got more questions here, guys. So next question is, do most women have trouble with digestive issues as they age? And I'm going to add to that. What is your take on probiotics?
So I wouldn't say most women have digestive problems. I mean, there are a lot of people that have digestive problems in the younger years that might get worse with menopause. The reality is we know that good digestion ideally is exposed to a lot of dietary fiber, in the ballpark of, 25 to 30 grams a day, and that the average American is eating like 11 to 14 grams of fiber. So many people, women included, are not really eating the plant-based diet to the degree that it's really recommended. So, it's pretty clear that what's the most important factor for maintaining a healthy gut is to eat a plant-based diet that includes fiber. So probiotics are, supplements that include various combinations or strains of healthy bacteria. But I don't know about you, but I feel like the more we learn about the gut microbiome, the more we realize we know nothing. And that when we just cherry pick a random probiotic and say, take it, we have like no idea if it's going to address that person's particular concern, because they probably have a unique microbiome. So I think people can eat yogurt, people can eat kimchi, people can, do the kefir, and I can't even 100% say that we know that you can take a probiotic, it's not going to hurt you, because I don't know that we know that to be the case for all people. So
I think the thing about the gut to remember for people in its most basic sense is that it's a community. Like Hillary was saying, sorry, Haley's my daughter.
Yeah.
Like Hillary was saying, if you throw one strain in there of, good bacteria, even though it's good, it may upset the community. And everyone has their own community. And again, it's like the more we know, the less we know. And taking probiotic supplements, well, I know, Hillary, you do prescribe them for your cancer, your chemotherapy.
not a lot,
Okay.
because particularly for immunocompromised people, they shouldn't take probiotics. But sometimes I'll say, okay, take one that has a lot of strains and has a high CFU count.
Mm-hmm.
And if nothing changes by the time you're done with the bottle, then stop taking it. And there are research studies on particular strains of probiotics for certain conditions,
Yes.
like Florastor and antibiotic-induced diarrhea. But I think to just circle back around to really what's the most important thing, like people could take probiotics. I said this to Liz.
Mm-hmm.
It might even have made it into the book.
Great. It did.
You can
It's great
take taking a probiotic and not eating a high fiber diet is like buying a goldfish and never feeding it. Find it.
I love that one.
You're gonna find it floating belly up because
it needs to be fed.
You're not giving it the food.
That's great.
Does your book have menus or meal plans that would be helpful?
Yes and yes. We have nearly 25 recipes, and for all sorts of things from breakfast to lunch to side dishes and even desserts. Nearly all of them have no added sugar in them. We do have a couple of desserts and maybe a muffin that has some added sugar, but we don't use added sugar. So and we also have 3 different calorie levels and 5 days a piece on each of the 3 calorie levels. If you want something that's structured, you don't have to do that. That's kind of like the highest level, we're going to say, of structure.
I mean, you might look at it and say, that's what 1,600 calories looks like.
That's what 2,000 calories looks like.
And these are examples of breakfast, lunches, dinners. We have lots of snacks with protein in them because they're going to be more filling. So yeah, we actually provide a lot of where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. How about this next question? We have 2 or 3 more questions, guys. So does the cookbook have choices for protein for a vegetarian?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. That's such a great, we could have brought that point up, but yes, exactly. You can make all of these recipes into vegetarian recipes. And then I would just want to tell you about this one recipe in particular. It's called Stir Fry Your Way. And you can use it's like 4 different ways to make this basic stir fry. So you can put tofu, you could put beef, you could put chicken, and you could put shrimp in there. So we are super flexible, and that's the way we design the recipes.
And none of them are complicated. No, I mean, anybody can make these because we have complex lives and we're not going to sit down with complicated
We're
things.
not going to complicate your life.
Right. So speaking of complex lives, this next question is somewhat long, but I'm going to read it. Please, I think it's important because of the situation we're dealing with all of us dealing with across the country and across the globe. This can feel overwhelming as I'm super busy with young kids, had children late, hybrid school schedule, part-time job, etc. Can you recommend resources that list healthy, plant-based, unprocessed foods that can be prepared, eaten in a very short time?
Are you talking about like meal kit delivery services or
No. I
something?
think I mean, this nice lady wants to cook it at home, but something that's not complicated probably, and something that's
Well,
not
it's- I mean,
unprocessed.
so
There's
it's
so many.
again, you know, like if we
Yeah.
sat down with somebody and spent some time talking to them about their food preferences, you know, we could help maybe to try to narrow that down. But there are so many cooking blogs. I mean, there are so many
Bloggers and-
platforms
yeah.
of people that make, you know, healthy cooking for
Vegetarian.
families on a budget. I mean, there's many resources, but it's really hard
Yeah.
to say what somebody as an individual is going to like, and what is easy cooking for somebody else still feels like too much to,
But
you know,
so
someone else.
so Liz and Hillary, does your book list healthy, plant-based, unprocessed foods?
Well, that's what the meal plans
all
are.
the meal plans are full of those.
Okay.
And in the
and you
resources
know-
section.
You know what
have,
else
like,
we
stuff.
have is, so we have meals that you can assemble, not cook. You know what I mean? So
Right.
you're pairing this with this, and it's a meal. You didn't really cook it. We have lots of those tips as well. So even though we have easy recipes, we also have meals to assemble, like we do on so many nights.
In your book?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there are resources in the back that you could glean some of that stuff
Yeah.
from. But I mean, what I can tell you about it is whatever somebody decides to do. You know, when I speak to people in my office about their meal planning stuff, the people that tend to be able to pull it off during the week, almost without exception, put some energy into planning and shopping and maybe doing some bulk food cooking on the weekends.
Right.
Because the reality is we know that humans only can make so many decisions in the course of a day. And if we wait until the end of a long work day where all the family issues are flying and we're exhausted from work, and then we try to decide what we're going to have for dinner, we usually hit a wall. So, you know, it can be as simple as just making a whole bunch of marinated chicken on the grill on the weekends, and then, you know,
they're
having it hot
vegetarian.
one day.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
is this a person a vegetarian?
Yes.
She just I think the question was unprocessed foods, more like, you know.
Unprocessed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, what I was thinking as you were saying that, there are so many great books out there about meal planning, simple meal planning, like Meal Planning for Dummies, but that they also have a vegetarian or a plant-based angle to them. So you just get online and take a look. But I just can't think of the name of one right off the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean,
What is, you guys
it's
mentioned
really
that-
more of a process and a one-on-one
Yeah.
counseling and education thing. It's a pretty broad question.
So what is, you mentioned a website, your website, what was that?
My website is betteristheNewPerfect.com.
Better
Better is the new perfect. Yes.
is new perfect.
Is the new perfect.
Better is the new
The
perfect.
new perfect.com.
.com. And Hillary has a website too.
Mine's
Go ahead.
.com.
What is it?
Hillary with two L's.
Yeah.
HILLARYWRIGHT. And on my website, there's actually, for people that might be interested in buying the book, there is a link to the Menopause Diet Plan and links to all the online sellers.
Okay,
that-
just so I'm sure I get it, because I'm typing this to the chat. Better is the new perfect.com
Yes.
and HillaryWright.com.
Correct. Hillary with two L's.
Yes, I got it. I got it, sister.
And
Done.
Thing.
Liz and Hillary, why don't you let the audience know how they can get a copy of your book and where, you know, and if they, you know, want to have one for themselves as well as we'd like to
Yes.
have them for us.
Any online seller is going to sell the book. So the book is published by Penguin Random House, Rodale Press, which has a very wide distribution. So it will likely be in bookstores as well. It's just that a lot of people aren't going into bookstores. So any online book selling platform, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Indie Books,
Target. Yeah, Target or
Probably,
Walgreens or
probably.
Walmart, I think, in Target. Yeah.
And I usually get a lot of times after lectures, especially if there's any kind of slideshow, if maybe you can let us have the slideshow, we can, when we archive this on our website, we can put the slideshow for people to have it as a download to have it for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, there's no more questions. Everybody says thank you for a great presentation. It was a great information. Thank you for spending an hour of your time with us. We truly, truly appreciate it, and honored to have you guys on with us today. And like I said, it's being recorded. We will have it up on the website. I will share it with both of you as well.
Thank you.
So you guys could have it. And great presenters. Awesome. We're going to do this again if you guys have time.
You guys,
Thanks.
I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to say as well that thank you very much for connecting with me. And the minute I saw your book, and I just immediately said, I have to have you guys come on because this is such a relevant topic. And you are just wonderful speakers. And I could tell that your relationship and your dynamic, you must be awesome guys to work with. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You did a great job.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys. Have a great day.
You too.